Formula One sprint races get a lot of mixed reviews. A lot of the drivers seem to hate them, calling them distractions from the actual race and extra work that they don't really want. As a fan who watches from his couch most weekends, I'm more than happy to get the extra action on a Friday and Saturday. With 3 down and 3 more to come this season, we've had a pretty good chance to make an assessment on them. One suggested change has gained a lot of attention, and today we're going to look at how Formula One could create a separate championship, as well as the potential for changes to race rules to improve the on-track action. Let's get started. Sprint weekends have come a long way since their inception. Debuted in 2021, they saw the usual weekend format change to introduce a second, shortened race to offer more wheel-to-wheel action, attempting to ensure each day of the Grand Prix weekend includes significant action. It saw qualifying moved from Saturday afternoon to Friday evening, with the hour-long session setting the grid for the sprint. The result of the sprint would then decide Sunday's starting order. The driver who won the sprint would start the Grand Prix on pole. If someone crashed out or retired with car troubles, they'd be starting from the back. There were points on offer for the top 3 finishers, but the reward for a good sprint race was not worth the risk of having a bad one. Drivers would sit in the car thinking, I could try this move on the car in front, but if I get it wrong, go off and start 10 places lower on Sunday, I'm screwed. So the FIA gave more championship points to the sprint, offering them all the way down to 8th place to try and tempt drivers into making a move or two. There were some takers, but still, the reward of 1 extra point wasn't worth the risk of wrecking your car. The 2023 season welcomed more innovation to the sprint race. Saturday's shorter race no longer sets the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix, with that now being decided by Friday evening's qualifying session. Whoever is fastest on Friday evening now starts from pole on Sunday. Removing the risk of losing grid positions was a great change. The sprint, along with its own qualifying shootout, is now essentially a separate entity from the main Grand Prix. The changes have made them better. If you're a purist who doesn't care about the sprint, then don't watch on Saturday. If you do care, or just enjoy watching really fast cars race each other, then watch on Saturday. Whatever side you're on, you can rest assured that the traditional qualifying and race format will be completely unaffected by the fact it is a sprint race weekend, apart from qualifying on Friday instead of Saturday, but that isn't exactly the end of the world, is it? While the changes have improved things for fans and viewers, the drivers are still not particularly happy. Verstappen has been one of the most outspoken drivers with his comments on the sprint races. I don't like it, Max said. For me, the weekend format I don't really enjoy. I don't mind the 1 practice and going straight into qualifying. I think it probably is even better for me. I just don't like that there's no feeling with it. McLaren's Lando Norris has said similar things as well. Growing up, always just having qualifying and then the race, that's always what I've known Formula One to be, said Norris. So in a way, I'm with Max on that. I love the build-up of pressure of having qualifying in 1 race, nothing coming in between. That's just the structure of it. I like Formula One how it is. That's not to say that they all hate it. The Mercedes drivers have been pretty positive about sprint races with the new 2023 format, as has Alfa Romeo's Valtteri Bottas and Alpine's Esteban Ocon. But there is still room for innovation, and the sprint format will continue to evolve in the coming seasons. One idea that is gaining momentum is the introduction of a sprint championship. Speaking on the Sky F1 podcast, David Croft, or Crofty, suggested that the sprint remain part of the sport, but split it off into its own category. I think the sprint concept is good. I like it, he said. But I don't like it being part of the World Championship. I like 2 separate World Championships. Having your sprint day on a Friday, maybe, rather than a Saturday. You could go into sprint qualifying, and then the sprint with maybe a 20-minute warm-up in the morning. That's your Friday. Then the cars are not in Parc Ferme for the rest of the weekend. Then you have your practice session on the Saturday morning, Saturday qualifying race on Sunday. So you're keeping the 2 very separate for different World Championships. This would gain the advantage of keeping the traditional Saturday and Sunday format. Give the drivers a single practice session on Saturday before qualifying, and then the race on Sunday. The idea of scrapping practice sessions on Friday has been floated a few times this season. George Russell has said on more than 1 occasion that they don't need anywhere near the amount of practice time they get on a normal race weekend. Crofty's idea also included a way of making the sprint weekend less arduous for the drivers as well. If all the drivers don't want to run in the Sprint World Championship, that's fine, he said. There are enough reserve drivers that do. Maybe that's a good way of getting the reserve drivers involved in that. So commercially, that's what I'd look at. On the surface, this is a great idea. We could see Red Bull's massive junior drivers go up against the likes of Aston Martin's Stoffel Van Dorn. Antonio Giovinazzi could make a return for Ferrari. Mick Schumacher might see the track again. There is a lot of crossover between reserve drivers though, with the Mercedes customers sharing a selection of Mick Schumacher, Felipe Drugovich and Stoffel Van Dorn among others. Most teams only have one reserve as well. What you would probably end up with is a separate championship on 10 cars, featuring drivers who can no longer race in F2, but are potentially F1 material. There is a gap in the system at the moment. More drivers are winning F2 championships than are being given chances in Formula 1. They could make the move to IndyCar or Formula E, but for whatever reason, none of them are taking that chance. Instead, they prefer to take on the role of simulator and test drivers for F1 teams, hoping one of the main drivers gets ill and they get a race or two to prove themselves. The 20 full-time drivers wouldn't have to drive 4 competitive sessions in a weekend, and 10 drivers would get the chance to show what they can do. Sounds great, right? Well, there are some pretty big problems as well though. Not many Formula 1 fans are going to be motivated to tune into a 10-car race that doesn't have any impact on the World Championship and doesn't involve any of their favourite drivers. What happens if a driver crashes a car and the team can't fix it for Saturday? How do you regulate engine usage? What happens if parts need changing? Who gets the grid penalty? Do the teams have to have a third car with them to get around this problem? It would be interesting to see a separate championship for the reserve drivers in Formula 1 cars, but the logistics and cost of getting it up and running are perhaps too great. Maybe we'll see the idea evolve in the future though, and perhaps those reserve drivers could get a chance to drive more often. It would definitely help them out when a driver does come down ill and need replacing. One more topic of discussion from the Sky F1 podcast that I want to pull out quickly that I thought was interesting was the idea of removing blue flags. Formula 1 is already incredibly complicated, even if you just follow it in the most basic sense, watching cars go fast on Sundays. All the flags, tyre rules, DRS, penalties, it gets pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. Even the sport's ruling body and their on-track representatives seem to have no idea what is happening at times. Crofty said, "Ban blue flags, because if you're good enough to be leading a race, you're good enough to pass another driver not leading the race, because they're last without them having to jump out the way. It might make things a lot more interesting as well. Watching Max Verstappen lap 2 Hasses every weekend isn't exactly thrilling. Watching Max have a half a lap battle with a wily old vet like Nico Hülkenberg sounds excellent though. Like Crofty says, if you are leading the race, then you're fast enough to pass those back markers. Why should you have more help? People sometimes use the argument that an accident with a back marker could ruin the race of the lapping car. But the flip side of that is that a race leader could ruin the race of a lapped car by hitting them. No Formula 1 driver actually wants to have an accident. While the Sprint Race Championship might be a non-starter, we like the sound of no blue flags. But what do you think? Is a Sprint Race Championship something you'd be interested in? What about removing blue flags? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And until next time, drive safe and bye for now.